Sure, let's go see Miss Carroway. There are only 3 places she would be at this time of day. After you poke your head into the Motherlode saloon, you don't need to check the other 2. At the back table, she sits with 5 cards in hand and a pair of gamblers on the other side. A glittering rush of gold and silver lies between them. She looks up at your approach and gives a small smile that nearly shatters her cold gambler's veneer. Hello there, Calamity. Come pull up a chair and watch me work. One of the men tosses his cards back onto the table in surrender, but the other, a variant, nearly bald fellow called Fitz, just stares back at her. I want to see those cards. Call. He then pushes a fair bit of silver into the middle to join with the glittery collection that is already there. A fair-sized pot, even by a prospector's standards. Well, Fitz, she muses, I hate to relieve you of your riches. She sets her cards down one by one to reveal a pair of aces. Fitz reluctantly lays his own out to reveal a pair of 8s. Not a winning hand. Well, there goes that windfall. Not every day that desperate settlers with good money come along to buy an old ox. It'll happen again, she offers over as she rakes in the silver and gold. This next year, or next. Come see me then. The 2 exchange a chuckle, and Miss Carroway pours Fitz a consolidation tumbler of whiskey, then follows it with one of her own. What brings you by, Calamity? She asks and doesn't toss back the liquor. Something I'd like to talk to you about, something personal. Personal? It's always personal, unless you're asking why the moon comes up like it does, or why sometimes it's so big in the sky. Miss Carroway says as she absently refills her shot glass while other players scurry off for a bit. The moon rises because it always has. That's exactly what my father said to me when I asked the question the first time. Miss Carroway notes sourly. It's not an answer, not really. It just holds the place for a time. Why are you really here? We could begin a romance here. But we want to know about Marshal Steele first. Do you remember Marshal Simon James? Of course I do. Hard man, hard as iron. Except for mice, she says with a little shake of her head. Don't know why. They didn't do nothing more than scurry around and drop surprises for him to step on. But he let them be. Strange man, probably a little touched. Miss Carroway looks away a long moment and clears her throat. He died on New Year's Day. Can't say I heard the shot, what with everyone shooting to celebrate. But that next morning, Mother Maddie came by to wish him well, and, well, there he was. Dead, sprawled in front of the stove. Cold. Been dead a little lick, but you could still move him about. 1 shot right to the back. I think I never saw it coming. Ground was frozen so they couldn't bury him right off. I think they put up a collection for a coffin and JT saw to it from there. When the weather did warm, some of the townies buried him up on Boot Hill, facing east so he could see the sunrise. Afterward, well, we all get back on with things. Your father mentioned something about marshals once? Not that I remember. Well, I like you, Calamity, she notes. But what my father told me ain't for other ears. Sorry. Okay. Who do you think killed Marshal James? I'd wager a small pile on it being Tumbleweed. You would be correct. He were around town that New Year's night and no on account of he stopped in a Motherlode. Man had a beer in a cup and then moved on as sober as it gets. But the next day, he were as pale as the rest of us. I figured he did the deed, probably his first time too. That might have been why he drank all night to keep the whispers at bay. Yep. It does. She agrees with a twinge of regret. Have you seen a man who's been about, goes by the name of Steele? Sure, he's got a tin style like yours, but lots of people pass through, she says, then catches your eye and holds it a long moment. He is just passing through, ain't he? He won't be staying long. Glad to hear. 2 marshals just ain't right, or fair, she says honestly. Go on, ask a question. I heard you went down to Elko. Did you happen to see Tumbleweed Jack while you were there? Yeah, I certainly did. Yeah, how is he? In trouble, as usual. Should be out in Carson City now doing his time. Well, a few years of toughening up might be good for him. He always seemed like a boy wearing a too big hat. She glances at your newly acquired hat. I like yours, by the way. You need a little bit of shading if you're going to do more than polish that tin star. But enough about that, she says and takes a moment to clear her throat. Look, my father wants to know your intentions. Yeah, I intend to... We might need him against Schmidt. No, not Schmidt. Yeah, let's bring down Schmidt. No, against Steele, I mean. I think we could come to an arrangement. He hoped you'd say that, Miss Carroway says, and he's willing to meet you halfway, so to speak. Having a dozen guns at your back is one thing. Being able to call on them any time you like, for gunplay and hospitality both, well, that's a sight better now, isn't it? Thing is, what are you offering in return? What do you intend for Lander County? Personal fiefdom. Sure. We're making it a paradise. She listens as you lay out the proposed utopia. Sounds nice, she admits. Getting there, though, that's the trouble. Having already visited what had been the grave of Marshal James, you consider what else to ask Miss Carroway. You look back to Miss Carroway and find her idly leaning against a nearby wall. You step on out of the saloon and into clear air. All right, Preston. As usual, J.T. Preston is in the dining room of the Grand Haven Hotel. Hello there, Marshal Smith. I'm getting all kinds of visitors today, Preston offers over. Need something from me? I've got a question. You knew Marshal James? Marshal James. Preston leans back from the table and considers the name. Yes, I recall the man. Rough fella, a no-nonsense strip of rawhide. He seemed to like threatening with me with a stare. This was before I became sheriff. Still, shame what happened to him. Man got shot, got buried, and that was that. Except, of course, that they kept sending more marshals. Who would want him dead? Plenty of people. Preston notes, then takes a drink. He ruffled a lot of feathers around here. That include yours? On occasion, Preston admits. But I know we'd never have that sort of disagreement. And if you should happen to fall during your duty, I'll buy you a coffin like I did for him. You can be together, facing east off of Old Boot Hill. Yeah, about that. Someone stole my coffin? Preston barks out incredulously. Well, that tips my steer. You just can't trust anyone these days. You know anyone who'd do something like that? A few, and I'll be checking in on them, that's for certain, Preston promises. After all, I did buy the pine boards. Second marshal for the county, perhaps? Matter of fact, the man did come by wearing a tin star. Had breakfast just over there, Preston notes. I figured he was just passing through, but now I ain't so sure. I found out what that balloon was about. It was a balloon? Preston asks, then leans back in his chair. Out here, in the midst of a wasteland? That's the strangest thing I've ever heard. Next thing you know, people will be talking about airships. So tell me more. Yeah. A countessa? Preston blinks hard. That's a better tale than that yarn about camels being round these parts. You ever heard of a Marshal Steele? Can't say I have, Preston says. But then I don't generally get too friendly with any of those. If you're asking around about people, I just talking to Dan Schmidt. I heard he's in town again. Yeah, that's all I need for now. And we'll ask around a bit. All it takes is a quick stroll over to the motherlode for you to see Mother Maddie. Her white hair is bound up as usual, though there is a hint of grease on the collar of her dark dress. She's been cooking, or else watching someone cook. Could be either, could be both. She looks up from washing glasses as your question trails off. Yes, I knew Marshal James. He were a better marshal than you, but he got himself killed. Found him shot in the back when I went over to... It don't matter. What matters is that Steele fella. Only I don't think his name is Steele. At least it ain't always been. Yeah, let us not let Steele smear the marshal's good name by proxy. Yes, I can see that, she agrees. I'll lend my voice when the time comes. Alright, ask around a bit more. It doesn't take much to track down Frank Spears. He's taken his ease in front of the assayers with a bucket of beer and his favorite ladle. He absently rubs at his jaw as you approach. Marshal. You quickly set out the question and he begins to nod along. Sure, there was a Marshal Steele down Arizona way for years. Started back before I was born. Gotta be old, a lot older than that other fellow you're talking about. Unless he comes from real good stock, Frank notes. Yeah, I'd like you to stand witness when the time comes. Sure. Maybe then someone will buy me a whiskey chaser when the time comes. He hints subtly. Subtly, yeah. Ask around a bit more. You ask around here and there, but no one really knows all that much more. Okay, then ponder what I know. Whoever is behind this is trying to ease you away from being the Marshal of Orlando County. You certainly aren't about to give up your position because of someone else's say-so. And this is about more than just having facts in hand. You need to convince people that you are right, or else this could get bloody. The townsfolk have already seen several marshals come and go, and so your passing might just be one more. Whereas if enough of them decide they like steel better, well, they've got pistols and rifles too. That the grave of Marshal James is empty will be a disquieting thing to the townsfolk. Most like the man, and the desecration will make them thoughtful. That you have Dan for an eyewitness as to the identity or lack therein of Roger Steele could be crucial, though there are several Steeles who are marshals and people can be mistaken. Still, people seem to trust Dan, and that could matter for more. Mother Maddie's word isn't law, but she knows things and people around these parts trust her. That could be important. Frank knows about Marshal Steele from Arizona, specifically the age of the man and how unlikely it is that he'd be quite so spry as to come to Nevada in his retirement. The testimony of Jack Tumbleweed Kent will go a long way to convincing people that something larger is at work here. If need be, you can bring him back to Preston Springs, but just the fact that you could do so should be enough for people to accept the veracity of the claim. Marshal James's telegraph isn't exactly definitive, especially coming from a supposedly dead man, but he's still a recognized marshal by the state, and the little piece of paper certainly does cast doubt on Steele's explanation of things. Having a telegraph from Washington, specifically from Hugh McCullough, the Secretary of the Treasury himself, pretty much puts paid to anything Steele might try and say. The only question is whether or not people will accept the piece of paper as evidence. It is in the proper format and was legally sent and received, but most of them don't know a whit of all that. A telegraph from the president is no small thing. Even if you faked it, such an effort could be easily exposed, and everyone knows that. And with all of that evidence, we're heading to the Grand Haven Hotel. Your boots pound across the floor of the Grand Haven Hotel as you step inside with your pistol holstered but ready. There is not a sign of Marshal Steele, but a swirl of the registry tells you he hasn't checked out. Not unless he left all his luggage and made a sudden run for the hills. "He's not here." A woman's lovely voice sings out, and you instantly recognize it as belonging to Miss Maria Agustina. You turn and find the Mexican noblewoman by the window with a slim book in hand. Her long dark hair is kept in place by a net of silver that plays well off a summer green dress. A fringe of lace starts about the cuffs and hem right down to the polished black shoes. A matching belt, green with a silver buckle, completes the ensemble. Her eyes are wary and readily evade your own. "At least I assume you're looking for Mr. Steele." "Sorry, you said Mr. Steele. What happened to Marshal Steele?" "Oh, there may be a Marshal Steele somewhere beneath those whiskers, but he's not likely to come out any time soon," she relates calmly. "We had a long talk, him and I. Long enough for me to know that he knows he's not here to enforce laws." "Steele isn't here. That's quite a letdown, but he can't be far, at least not if what Maria implies is true." A solid thump upon the floorboards makes you turn as Carlos fills the doorway. Maria's uncle appears little different than he had at your first meeting. His nearly bald head is only partially hidden by the jaunt of a tilted, round-brimmed hat. In his hand rests a stout mug, and judging from the nip of it in the air, it's not merely coffee. "I see you there, Calamity. I saw you before you got up this morning," he warns lightly, "and I will be there when you bend down again." "I always wanted an angel to watch over me." "So did I, once," Carlos says and glances toward the main room of the hotel. "If you should see one, send them by. I could use a rest." He wanders away. That leaves you and Maria to chuckle over the whole thing. "Forgive my uncle, he prefers the hot lands of his birth," she suggests. "Emperor Maximilian, well, things are not going well down there." Things are not well in Mexico? "No, I fear not. There are many battles, men and armies striving to control. The Emperor on one side and Juarez on the other." She sighs. "There's much death and destruction. Things were simpler once, but now even the simplest thing is very difficult." More immediate concerns, though. "Yes, a different topic, if not a different subject," she says briskly and glances ever so briefly down the hall. Her uncle stands by the fire in the main room with a cup of something in hand, and definitely seems to be out of earshot. Has he said anything in particular about what he's after?" "No, a failing on his part in several ways. Any law enforcer will gladly tell you what he's about," she explains softly. which laws he finds important, which kinds of people he has found to be troublesome, and so on. The older they are, the more they know, but Steele does not speak about such things, ergo Mr. Steele is not here for the laws. What exactly has he been up to? I couldn't say. His coming and goings are not mine to spy, she replies. However, I have permitted Eduardo to inspect the saloons and shops here as a good guarda-espaldas should. He says that Roger, Mr. Steele, has paid regular calls upon all three saloons, as well as the tannery and the sayers. From what he can tell, making friends is the Marshal's highest priority here. Indeed, he has already dined with Sheriff Preston. Have you been getting along? Just fine, thank you, she says as she idly tugs at the sleeves of her long dress. It is different than I expected, of course. Indeed, I did not know what to think at all coming across the ocean. I suspected there would be hovels, trail and track instead of road or rail, coyotes. Oh, no, that's her saying that. It is different than I expected, of course. Indeed, I did not know what to think at all coming across the ocean. I suspected there would be hovels, trail and track instead of road or rail, coyotes in the distance, not unlike untended dogs, mountains, though I'm always at home amid mountains, and so yes, I believe I'm comfortable here. What about the monks? Yes, the brothers are preparing the ground for their hermitage even as we speak, she says and glances out a nearby window at the distant mountains. One day, alas not any time soon, there will a sacred place away from the turmoils of men. A beacon for those who wish to come and pray in the still silence of distant peaks. When she turns back, her eyes are as calm as a rare summer day. Move on to more important things. I'll be going then to look for Mr. Steele. Try the Babylon, she suggests as you turn to go, for if Mr. Steele can convince the wealthier members of the town of the rightness of his path, then most of the rest will follow out of habit. The Babylon saloon fairly churns with local folk, despite the silence that covers the rest of the town. Oil lamps are lit against the settling dusk, and rambunctious laughter roars out from within. Dan lumbers over and tilts an ear toward the ongoing festivities. Sounds like quite a soiree. Miss Carroway ambles out from an alley and lounges beside the Babylon's swinging doors. Shall we? Sure, head in and immediately begin laying out my evidence. You step inside as if you were just in for a drink. The luxurious interior is grand as always, with polished brass fixtures, and a yawning mirror behind the bar. Paintings of distant parts of the world flicker in the oil light. Indeed, they shift and stir as if you could step through the canvas and be right there in the far-off lands. The saloon is pretty well packed, with people rubbing elbows at the bar and at least 4 to a table. You briefly catch sight of Sim Bitkovich lounging at the end of the bar and talking to a little dove of a gal, who seems to be all but eating out of his hand. It seems like tonight, like most nights, the Babylon saloon is the place to be. The Gibsons, I'll handle them if it comes to that, Miss Carroway whispers, then saunters right on back toward a couple of seedy fellas. Dan plunges right into the nearby crowd and begins to greet everyone in turn. A burst of laughter erupts from the end of the bar. There the impostor Steele pours out drinks from a nearly empty whiskey bottle as he schmoozes with a cluster of man and woman whose red ties and scarves burnish their gold pocket watches and earrings. He looks over and blinks hard before he slowly sets down the bottle. But before he can speak a word, you begin your recitation of the facts. The whole saloon turns an ear as you begin to lay things out. Yeah, start with the salacious bits and then spoon-feed the other facts to the saloon. Some are listening to what you're saying. Yeah, time to give Dan the floor for a moment. I ran into Marshal Steele down Arizona way a few years back, Dan begins amiably. Back when Silver started coming out the mountains down there before the war. I got to know him a little, and while I'm not a spring chicken, I can tell you plain that the man over there isn't the Marshal I met. I don't know you either, Steele replies from the bar, and I do have a big family, so one of us is mistaken. That is enough to put doubt to Dan's claim, but the issue of identity is now in the open. Some are listening to what you're saying. Yeah, Tumbleweed Jack had some interesting things to say. Plenty do know Tumbleweed Jack. It's hard not to remember a man who went from free-roaming gunslinger to prisoner. You describe his contacts in Elko and the bounty on Marshall so vividly that it gets people angry that they can't do the man in themselves, but most are willing to settle for him being in chains. Most everyone is paying attention. Yeah, Frank Spears. People can be wrong about a lot of things from childhood, and old people can age gracefully. Frank lays out his thinking, and at the end there is more doubt in the crowd about Mr. Steele. Move on to the pertinent details. Yeah, you all know Mother Maddie, who runs the mother lode? Well, she doesn't like Mr. Steele, not one bit. There is something to him that just ruffles her feathers. Everyone in this town knows each other, and some opinions matter, especially if that opinion belongs to the gold-hearted Mother Maddies. She steps forward from where she had slipped in just a little while ago. When she's done laying out her feelings about Mr. Steele, you half expect the paint to peel. In the back, where a hard scrabble lurks, more than a few tilt their head thoughtfully at her words. Like as not, they had received a bit of Mother Maddie's grudging generosity, and now they can't help but listen hard. I'm listening hard. Prepare to bring out the big guns amongst your evidence. Have a telegram, direct from President Johnson himself. The crowd murmurs in distance, and in distinct delight at the thought of the president's telegram. You must have paid a tidy price to set that up. How much does bribing a telegraph operator cost? Steele tosses out hurriedly. I sent a telegraph to San Francisco, and received a reply concerning my appointment from Marshal James. Then Steele scoffs openly, and several others can't help but agree. He's dead, Steele says simply. Marshal James is no more. Maybe you got some other marshal there named James, but it weren't the one I knew. The room is dividing into two sections, those that agree and those who are undecided. Now there's one other thing I want to bring up. I went out to Boot Hill and visited the grave of Marshal James. Or I would have, except that the coffin ain't there anymore. Understanding dawns in the crowd's eyes. Soon enough they have someone run out to Boot Hill and return with news that the grave is in fact dug up. They still don't quite know what to make of the telegram from Marshal James though, but more than a few seem willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. End the oratory and confront the impostor. You've got Steele square in your sights, and despite the man's rhetorical wiggling, there isn't a thing he can do. One by one, the patrons of the Babylon Saloon begin to stare and glare at the man, their collective hate at his base trickery and gall rising up in a wave. When someone mentions that they've got a length of rope, you know it is time to act. Yeah, take him into protective custody, sure. All it takes are a few honeyed words about justice and law to cool things back down. After all, the cloud still loves you so. Pluck Steele's star off his tunic, yes. That little motion sets the crowd to cheering and clapping as you walk the impostor out of the door and down the street toward the cells. They like that, Steele admits halfway there. They won't like what is coming. Predictably, he doesn't say another cryptic word. You walk Steele right into your office and find Preston seated with feet up behind your desk. Two of his deputies cradle shotguns nearby. There's something in the way they lounge that sets Dan to a wary prowl. Normally, I'd say you were infringing on town business, but if this one isn't a marshal, then that makes it county troubles for certain. Preston notes. Steele looks to Preston with glare of annoyance. This is why we couldn't come to an arrangement, isn't it? Preston gives a low chuckle like that of a wolf pondering a mouse. What you talked about was predicated on certain things. They certainly didn't involve your being publicly flailed by solid evidence before a jury of townsfolk. It's going to be hard for him to be a marshal behind bars. Miss Carroway all but chortles and gives Steele a quick kick in the shins. Hey now, Dan warns. I'm the one who has to toss him into the cell if he can't walk. I'd help with that too, Miss Carroway offers lightly. That's enough fun, Preston says as he gestures to his deputies, who readily tromp with him toward the door. You have this, and so good night. That was a hoot, Miss Carroway admits, but since you got a grip on things here, I need to be elsewhere. There's saloons calling and poker to play. She gives you a parting wave as she saunters on out toward the lamp-lit interior of the Motherlode Saloon. Dan looks to you. The prospector has a definite spring in his step despite the lateness of evening. I liked how you convinced everyone that Steele wasn't who he said. That's the kind of thing I'm proud to do, Dan says. Glad I could help you out this time. Maybe the next one, too. With a little wave, he tromps on down the street. At the far end of Main Street, where the Grand Haven Hotel juts out ever so slightly, you catch sight of a figure in a full-length dress that belongs in a faraway land. Maria Agostina, etc. She raises a hand to you in greeting, and you could swear she smiles, even from across the way before she steps back inside. Alone again, you catch sight of a single stray snowflake as it drifts down from the heavens. And that is the end of chapter 5. And yep, that was certainly a very long chapter. Most of the chapters before then were about like 25 to 30 minutes. That one, about an hour. So I'll probably, by the looks of it, I'll have cut it up in 3 different parts. If it works out that way, I think it should. So yeah, quite an interesting chapter there. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.